The evolution of mixed martial arts is as much influenced by rules and safety as it is by its mass entertainment appeal. The early bouts were based on Brazilian Vale Tudo rules, where untimed fights could go on for hours and usually largely consisted of ground fighting. Ground fighting added a different element for many viewers, but what might be seen as a very interesting technical game to those who know what they are watching can be rather boring for a lay audience. Although mixed martial arts fighter Crow Crop once argued that ground fighting should be limited because it looks more brutal, this was certainly a sentiment shared by several outspoken British boxing teachers of the turn of the 20th century when Greco-Roman wrestling and Jiu-Jitsu were popular in music halls and touring fairs. Aesthetics often prevail in the sport with the powers that be, moulding the game to fit what they think best sells the style of combat. Judo is a strong example of this feature, with officials clearly showing awareness of the burgeoning sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Russian Sambo, both of which are breakaway schools of the original Kodokan Judo. Hitherto, less and less time has been permitted for the Newaza, ground fighting, and any throw involving gripping the leg in any way has also been taken out to distinguish Judo from these other two jacketed grappling sports. Rule changes in combat sports contribute massively to the evolution of a fighter's gameplay and martial arts training on the whole. Western boxers no longer needed to worry about grappling once gloves became mandatory, along with other decisive rule changes. And although the clinch remained an important aspect of the game, fights would be wholly focused on delivering and avoiding punches. With greater emphasis and protection afforded to the hand, Western-style boxers became the most efficient punchers in the world. Muay Thai and its equivalents in Laos and Cambodia also adopted the Western mufflers in the 1930s, but the way the fights were judged did not promote much of an improvement on punching techniques. These improvements would possibly come from Holland, where they would develop their own brand of Muay Thai-based kickboxing. An unfortunate side effect of the compulsory wearing of gloves is that rather than making the sport safer, it allowed for a greater volume of direct impact to the head. The neutral corner rule might have cost Jack Dempsey his rematch fight against Gene Tunney. Dempsey, who was behind on points, had floored the current champion in round 7. However, he had forgotten about the new rule that forbade fighters from hovering over their opponent, which was a favourite Jack Dempsey tactic. The fighters had to immediately go to a neutral corner, and only when they had reached this corner was the referee to begin counting out the fallen fighter. It was estimated that Tunney, who went on to win the fight by unanimous decision, was given anything from 3 to 8 seconds extra time to recover. The fight remains controversial, as it was noted that when Tunney knocked Dempsey down later, the referee commenced counting before Tunney arrived at the neutral corner. Other factors such as the use of the 20-foot ring rather than the 16-foot ring are also thrown into the what-if argument on Dempsey's behalf. A ring of that size favoured someone with better footwork such as Tunney rather than a fighter that used crowding tactics like Dempsey. Dempsey was the people's favourite and remained more so after this bout. However, the case for Tunney is quite clear. He had soundly beaten Dempsey a year before to gain the heavyweight championship of the world. He dominated the majority of the fight, including the closing rounds, and also scored a knockdown on Dempsey. At the end of the fight, Dempsey had little doubt Tunney fought the best on that day and told him so upon raising his hand. Another perceived victim of the long count is not so accommodating. 23 years after his title fight with Buster Douglas, Tyson Returns, Mike Tyson actively encouraged his Undisputed Truth live audience to watch Douglas's knockdown and count alongside the referee. Douglas might have received 4 or 5 seconds longer than he was allowed due to the referee's undeniably slow count. This was hotly disputed by Tyson's flamboyant manager Don King at the time. Nevertheless, Douglas had been dominating the fight up to that point, and Tyson knew it. The champion came out guns blazing in a desperate attempt to knock the challenger out, but Douglas could not have been as hurt as Tyson had hoped. The 42-1 underdog fought back hard and continued on the front foot, and it was clear Tyson was the far more damaged fighter, and it was here that Douglas knocked him out, causing one of who now faced a kidney operation and the loss of his beloved mother just 23 days before the fight. Despite the controversy kicked up after the fight, and I recall being a teenage fan being swept up in it all, the cold truth is that Douglas won the fight. He may have taken a long count, but he was merely responding to the referee as any good fighter will do. In the world of competitive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a peculiar new guard has emerged that demonstrates the direction the sport can go given its unique environment and rule set. A video surfaced showing the first match in the 185 to 205 pound purple belt division of the 2015 Colour State Championships, Hastings versus Debelac. Around 53 seconds into the bout, Hastings turns his back on his opponent and begins to walk on all fours backwards towards him. Possibly puzzled and or disgusted, Debelac stamp kicks Hastings on his backside, causing an immediate disqualification. The video of this match went viral, and many outside the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world immediately began to ridicule Hastings' behaviour. Many were further shocked to discover that Hastings was attempting a legitimate guard. The donkey guard's origins, it turns out, came from the infamous banned judo takedown known as kani basami, or flying scissors. For my sins, I recall being taken down by an excellent freestyle karate, kung fu instructor, using this technique during sparring, and being completely perplexed by what had happened. And I also recall a few times, training in submission grappling Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when I ended up holding an incidental version of the donkey guard. Due to the danger kani basami can present to opponents, many Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and submission grappling tournaments banned it. Jeff Glover developed the donkey guard to get around this rule. The move first came to public attention during the 2011 ADCC in Nottingham, England, when Jeff Glover used it against Tom Barlow. The move is not without its controversy within the world of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's disliked by many traditional grapplers due to the disrespect it shows an opponent by simply reversing into them, and there's also been arguments made that it has no combat efficiency outside of the sport.
Right, stop that! Silly!
Glover hits back, saying that he has effectively used it in real-life self-defense situations. I feel this particular argument really exemplifies the nub of this argument. Glover used the donkey guard effectively because the environment he was fighting in allowed him to do so, and although it is a relatively new concept, the guard is gaining some ground with competitors. We can see parallels in other combat sports. In the world of semi-contact competition, I have heard and seen widespread manipulation of the rule sets that have little bearing on what we might perceive as combat.
Some semi-contact freestyle and semi-contact kickboxing competitions
Saw many competitors being trained to automatically turn away from their opponents, particularly after scoring a point, as the back is not a legal scoring area.
And no striking the back.
As with the donkey guard, it seems incredible to consider that any fighter would think it was a good idea to turn their back on an active opponent. In freestyle karate, many competitors worked out a distinct advantage offered by a certain brand of protective equipment in the 1980s and early 90s. The Super Tag foot semi-contact range offered a lot of buffy padding and a loose fit. It wasn't long before wily veterans of the sport worked out that a slight yet significant reach advantage could be afforded by pulling the glove forward a bit. Accuracy became the name of the game in semi-contact rather than effect, so for a certain period several fighters would make contact with the end of their extended glove and then simultaneously slap their chest with their free hand to provide the illusion of making good contact. My friend, the writer and martial arts instructor Malcolm Martin, once wrote an article for Combat magazine that argued semi-contact competition could sometimes be more dangerous than full contact. This was largely due to the fact that many fighters did intentionally use excessive contact to cause an injury and cover it as if it was an accident. If they weren't disqualified or penalised, such fighters were immediately given the edge for the rest of the fight or even a victory if the other fighter could not continue. Kano Chigaro's grading system is responsible for what many regard to be a rather egregious yet well-known practice within many martial arts tournaments. Several clubs have been known to hold back pre-black belt competitive fighters even at the much earlier end of the grading scale, stopping them from grading in order that they might accumulate more victories at their rank. I've even witnessed students beg their instructor to award them a higher grade after they had won yet another important national tournament, only to be told that they would not get it unless they competed internationally. Whereas other combat sports that do not use the coloured belt system would not so easily get away with putting in experienced fighters at novice levels, the coloured belt method offers a unique opportunity for manipulation by both students and their teachers. As it stands, a student who has only had a year's experience in martial arts could find themselves competing against an individual who's been fighting in tournaments for several years, or even someone who's had an additional experience in a different style of martial art that uses a similar or even the same type of competition framework.
Someone, a professor or an instructor, is deliberately holding back a belt from a student for the purpose of giving them an edge in competition. Sandbagging primarily is the belts, but it's a form of cheating. If you're going to compete, and as long as there's no way to stop it. You want to be successful in competition, you have to do it too. Hate to put it that way, but yeah. So if you're the victim of it, all I can say is I'm sorry. I mean, that's just the way the game is played. If you want to be successful in competition, you gotta do it too.
We note that few people complained about Frank Bruno using the clinch tactic at the end of round 11 and for the whole of round 12 of his match with Oliver McCall. McCall had not been outfought. He had more energy in him than Bruno and was coming back with a vengeance towards the end of the bout. Bruno's most recent losses prior to this bout have been stoppages in the 5th and 7th round to Mike Tyson in 1989 and Lennox Lewis in 1993 respectively. He seemed to have shaken those ghosts as he made it into the final rounds, outpointing McCall, the man who had knocked Lewis out in a shocking second round upset. However, there were more apt shadows now cast over him. Towards the end of round 11, McCall brought forward a sudden sense of vigour that had been missing in the previous rounds, and Bruno had little choice but to hold on. Long-time fans feared the ghosts of Bruno's fights against Tim Witherspoon and James Bonecrusher Smith. Both these defeats had occurred in the same arena where he now fought. Witherspoon had beaten him by a stoppage at the 3-minute mark in round 11. However, looking at the challenger's situation in the 12th round against McCall, it seemed he was on his way to a repetition of the first defeat of his career. Bonecrusher Smith had been behind on points and knocked Bruno out in the final round. Our worst fears looked like they might be realised in those painful last minutes of the fight. Far from looking down on Bruno for holding, even casual boxing fans must have been praying for him to hug his opponent, as it was clear McCall was in a much better condition and was going after a very realistic last-ditch shot at victory. Bruno had won the adulation of his army of supporters because of his cheerful personality, something that some believed deprived him of a killer instinct, and his 95% knockout rate. He was a powerful puncher of his era, but isn't considered by many to be one of the hardest hitters of all time. He possessed a superb physique, but is an example that mental determination and physical endurance can be mutually exclusive. Criticism for his niceness in the ring was contrasted with criticism for his reliance on dirty tactics such as headbutting and lack of technique. Bruno was known for being flat-footed and was certainly no technician. What came out at the end of his fight with McCall was the thing that tends to allow most fighters to rise to the top: experience. He knew what was required in that situation to win the game. Manipulating or simply playing the game is what most of history's best fighters have always done regardless of their sport. Years after watching Bruno's victory, I was reminded of how well he had used the rules of his particular sport as opposed to outfighting his opponent when I attended my judging course in Muay Thai. Bruno's strategy would not have won him a Muay Thai bout, where a fighter's condition in the final round can determine the outcome of the fight. Even if one fighter has unanimously won all the previous rounds, he can still lose if he is in the worst physical shape. Muay Thai scores mainly on visible effect. Unlike Taekwondo in its competitive forms, Muay Thai does not award points according to the technical difficulty of the successfully landed technique. Many have argued that this process, which has influenced freestyle strike-based martial arts tournaments, may have contributed to more crowd-pleasing moves, yet is actively promoting the use of techniques with a low chance of success outside of the world of combat sports. I have some amazing examples of flamboyant techniques being pulled off with great effect in Muay Thai and mixed martial arts, but they're often the exception to the rule. History shows us that those who have dominated the ranks of full-contact combat sports certainly have their own unique styles and a high level of athletic ability, but what they are using tends to be an intelligent use of solid basics. Fights don't always go the way we want them to, and behind it all, there is that primitive side to our personalities that first spawned the trial by combat sense of justice. We want our heroes to be victorious, and this desire often allows us to bend our perceptions of reality to accommodate the result. Our superhero myths come from our ideals of fighting for justice. However, when it comes to a match fight, the winner is most often rightfully decided by the individual who plays the game best, given the tools made available to them, tangible and otherwise.